Fault Lines, Chapter 4. Miraculously, they survived the collector base. All hands. Building up to it, he had believed they would live. Had hoped he would not. It would have been a clean, clear end with his affinity for the dramatic. Had he traded his life for hers at any point, it would have been a wonderful symmetry. Unfortunately for poetic concerns, she was omnicompetent, and the opportunity did not present itself. The future was unknown, undecided, and undiscussed. She kept him close at hand, insisting he move to her cabin, out of life support. He had no knowledge of her plans, and the only clue he had was that squad members were disappearing at drop points. He understood the more unsavory members of the team leaving. He, of course, was one of them. He understood the loss of such as Jack or Zaid, those whose loyalties were limited and perhaps incendiary. He did not understand Garrus leaving. With the crew disappearing precipitously, he grew alarmed and suspicious. She was not cold or distant. In fact, his suspicion grew as she became kinder, and even solicitous. Fairly certain he would not be dumped unceremoniously on a destination such as Palaven, he was concerned when he was the last aboard, and they were headed to the Citadel. Edie had informed him. When his Siha had the gall to bring him a cup of tea, he took it from her hand carefully, set it down, and then yanked her by the wrist into his lap, took her face by the chin, and looked into her beautiful, treacherous eyes. Tell me what you are very carefully not telling me, Siha. She raised a brow. I hate fucking Drell tea. I don't know how you can stand it. Have the decency to drink alcohol. I haven't further time for patience, have I? Are you going to tell me voluntarily? She shook her head. Hell no. I thought you'd met me. He smiled at her. I have. He kissed her, and she relaxed, which was her second mistake. She kissed him back in relief, believing the argument was over. And it was. Just not in the way she thought. If she enjoyed leaving him in the dark, he would do the same to her. Her wrath was to be avoided. Not at all costs, but certainly in this case, she deserved being bypassed, as she had hoped to bypass him. Following her, he would do without question. Being left behind was unacceptable. He enjoyed for its own sake each stroke of her tongue, the brush of her lips, her ever-present hunger and need. Her muscles relaxed, her lips grew heated, and her eyes drifted blissfully closed. He knew her, knew how long it would take for Tiamat to warm and loosen her muscles, which she enjoyed, and her will, which she thought she understood. Moving his mouth to her ear, her face cradled in his hands, he said, Tell me, Siha, what you have planned. Tell me what your duplicitous mind has imagined will happen. He had always been meticulously careful with Venom, his words as pruned and cultivated as a bonsai. She had always been prone to suggestion under its influence, but he had given her no cause to fear he might be influencing her mind. The effect once again foretold by him, but not foreseen by her. Her brows drew together in confusion. I don't want to tell you. He nuzzled at her throat, licked at a scar there, idly. You will tell me. and then you will forget telling me. Realization hit her, and she tried to struggle physically and mentally, but was not able to, and he was viciously pleased. You devious fucking Drell asshole. He smiled. That is not a disputed or unknown fact, Siha. Tell me your plans. The conflict was on her face as she said, I'm taking you to the Citadel. You need to go to Huerta. Kolyat is there, and he needs you. This was not what he expected. There must be more. His arms tightened around her, and he kissed her again, loving, seeking, and afraid. And what will you do, Siha? It will please you to tell me, and then it will please you to forget. You will remember only that you brought me a cup of tea, because you thought of my needs, and I was grateful for your gesture of goodwill. So grateful that I pulled you by the wrist into my lap and kissed you, touched you until you were senseless in my arms. He added, because he was already here. It was already true, and he simply wanted to say it and let it echo unseen through her mind. You have always enjoyed being senseless in my arms, Ruth. You will always enjoy it. She closed her eyes and smiled, an expression of barbed pleasure that made him lean in and kiss her again. When he pulled back, she said, You do have a way with your hands, and your mouth, and your voice. Everything you do feels so damned good. It should be illegal, and I suspect it is. In this case, I'm sure it is. I'm gonna forget. And that's a shame. Her mouth tightened. I'm going into custody for the decimation of a Batarian colony. 300,000 people killed. When I was gone for 4 days, and I simply couldn't stay away from you, although I was supposed to be in the medbay, not bleeding to death, I had done a favor for Admiral Hackett. The Reapers would have come through a relay. I destroyed it. I have to go finish what I started, or I will be a fugitive, and there will be war with the Batarians. I only do one thing well. You know that. He pulled back and searched her face for truth, but he believed it was true. He was stunned. You will be certain that there are 2 things you do very well, Ruth. I adore you, and you must never doubt that you are good at being loved. He watched her face ripple from cold reality to subjective adoration, and he knew she had her doubts. He could pull them up by the root. He caressed her skin as he asked her, Do you monitor this room yourself? Have you any recordings of what goes on here? Is your Omnitool activated? No. Wish I'd thought of it, though. He smiled at her. Have you told anyone of these plans, Siha? Does anyone know your intentions? Edie or Joker, perhaps? Or have you told them only the destination? Her expression transformed to brutal determination. Nobody. You can't go into custody. If you're on the ship when I turn the Normandy over, you will be taken, and you will spend your final agonizing days having your mind flayed by Black Ops Asari matriarchs who will peel your brain back layer by layer. That's the best case scenario, because if your identities become known and you are behind locked doors you can't escape, you could be taken. passed around as a prize, bid on for the right to torture you to death. I can't risk that. If I warned you, you'd object. Forcefully. Kinda like now, huh? Fuck. Underestimated you again. I'm sorry, Thane. You deserve better. I fucked it up. Should have known not to bring you tea. I blame your stupid fucking volcano story. That was a stupid mistake. That's what I get when I allow a motherfucking drill asshole access to my head. Thought maybe you'd just stick to my body, but no. She was trying to protect him. He closed his eyes and tried to think. Ha! Now you feel bad about it. Good. Bad enough to take off the whammy and let me go like a decent person? His laugh was bitter. No, Siha. I am not that foolish. She shrugged. Had to try. Edie, you have been monitoring this conversation? Yes. Having been unshackled, congratulations on your swift assimilation into the world of ambiguity. I must ask 2 favors. Are you able to pilot the Normandy shuttle remotely? Yes. Excellent. When we reach the Citadel, I shall be leaving, but with your assistance, the Normandy shuttle may come under my control. I have not been paid for my services, but as it is a Cerberus shuttle, I will claim that as my fee. The Alliance will be able to replace it. I would be able to pilot it to Earth close to the Normandy signal, undetected, in the company of my son, under an assumed name. I would be able to alter the shuttle's registry and identification systems, and I will provide those methods to you for your potential future use. If found after the fact, to authorities, I would be a verifiably ill drow seeking the desert for my health. For Shepard, I would be an escape route if she changes her unreasonably stubborn mind. She has abandoned all other courses of action. She has no one who would know or think to help her. Although I might otherwise applaud her attempt at nobility, in this case it is foolhardy. Siha said, "Hey!" Then she shrugged. Well, foolhardy is kind of what I do. Thane continued, I do not trust the Alliance or that they will care for her. Is that acceptable to you? That is acceptable. You understand the delicacy of what I have just exposed and how that could be used against Commander Shepard if discovered? Please, for her protection, remove all record of this conversation. It would put the ship, you, and Commander Shepard at risk if discovered, and she is at risk due to trying to protect me. This is an opportunity, Edie, for you and I to protect her. I will strive to protect her if given the opportunity, despite the appearance of my current methods. I am otherwise out of strategic options. It is possible she will murder me, not undeserved, if this conversation is revealed. She does not wish to murder me, and I shall die soon anyway. She needn't hasten my demise. She has other priorities. To avoid detection, please loop in surveillance of my meditations. It should raise no suspicion. I have created hours of timed and predictable footage for your use at your discretion in this or other compromising conversations that may be wrested from your control when the Normandy is handed over to Alliance protocols. It would be best if you create records of the shuttle being destroyed before I take ownership. Alter the biometric logs to correspond to the occupancy of your surveillance. For your own safety, I would also suggest removing any monitoring that reveals you as an AI rather than a VI. Please assist me in this endeavor. You know I mean her no harm, and I only wish to prevent self-inflicted damage as the result of neglect of detail. I understand. I see the necessity for this, and the corresponding surveillance has been either destroyed or altered, biometric logs matching. Is there anything else you require? You fucking guys are unbelievable. Thank you, Edie. It has been an unexpected pleasure to serve with you. Please stay in touch with me, and if you have any further questions regarding strategy, organic behavior, or questions about Drell, please contact me through means that make you most comfortable. I am at your service. Please analyze the configuration of my Omni tool and assure yourself contacting me through that method is acceptable. Thank you, Sir Krios. I would be delighted to do so. Please, call me Thane. Thank you, Thane. Don't come to Earth. You'll get caught. You'll die. Sia, do not fear about me being tortured. That is a command. Were I unable to escape capture, there are means of suicide that cannot be detected or taken from me. My death is imminent and not a concern. Otherwise, those would be excellent reasons for any other man. Why didn't I fall for those guys? A question to consider for another time. She shook her head. No, I know the answer. Thane, I'm sorry I couldn't find another way. He bowed his head to hers. And I am sorry I do not have time left for patience. How many people have you killed after seducing them? His smile was suited to the question. 47. Impressive. I believe it. He inclined his head. He raised his head to gaze at her. It is more work keeping you alive than it was killing those individuals combined. Yeah, I believe that too. He tilted her chin up. Ruth, thank you for trying to protect me, for caring for my health, and for the life I might have with my son. You're welcome, but you're gonna ignore it. I have made note of your intentions. They humble and surprise me. I am going to ignore what you want for me and provide what I want for you. She smiled at him. I should be really mad, but this is the best damned hijacking ever. I'm sorry I'm not going to remember. I like it when you drive. That is the venom talking, see how? She leaned in and kissed him, took his face in her hands. Don't come to Earth. He rubbed his cheek against hers. Don't go to Earth. I have to. Then I must. Can we move on to you being grateful for my goodwill now? How long until we reach the Citadel? 3 days. You will find me extraordinarily grateful for the next 3 days, Ruth. Ruth, with her betrayals experienced and her mission completed, was a revelation. He spent his time coaxing each whim of pleasure from her mouth, from her body, not only unrepentant for violating her privacy, but actively grateful for having done it. He attended to her mind, her body, and her heart with all the care at his disposal. In the emptying, echoing ship, she was laughter and stories and lingering hands. He ensured that his death would be the trigger to restore her memories. He would only borrow her will, and only to stay with her as much as he could. He would return it to her whole, and she was right. It would be a shame if she did not remember. It was her mind and his, and he would gift it back to her freely when she was no longer able to kill him herself. She understood him. Watching her freed from fear of his torture, if not death, freed from inhibition of desire, and freed for a few brief days of the weight of her mission, she was a person to him. He was a person to her. He moved delicately through her thoughts and tore her doubts up from the root, fanned her understanding of how much he loved her into flame and banked deep embers. He gave her tools and permissions to protect her from the inevitable pain of losing him. He planted careful seeds in the barren places in the hope that she would live beyond him and find the peace she had granted him while he was alive. She would go into custody, and the Reapers would continue their attack, and most people had the same amount of time to live that they did. He and his Siha were forearmed and fierce, and those who would die were neither. She was still his burning gift, the memory of her flames seared, branded into him where no one else would see but her. He would live out his shortened days, remembering her face, and the fall of her hair, and the deep, slick pleasure of her tightening around him, her voice in his ears, and the way that affected his spine, her ever-present clasping hand in his. Each part of his body was tied to hers. Memories, thoughts, and devotions. This was love. This was cherishing between two unpracticed people, stumbling and stuttering, but not failing. He was not at peace. He did not meditate. There was roiling and longing and piercingly sweet pain, knowing these were likely his last days with her, despite his intentions. It hastened his hands to her, and in a falling rush he had no time for regret, only the greedy gathering of each moment. At the end of the 3 days, she did not, as he had assumed, have him drugged or escorted from the ship. She declared shore leave, walked through the Citadel with her hand in his, and they went out to an elaborate dinner. They stayed in a sumptuous hotel room, and she wore a magnificent dress that he tore from her body. She said no goodbye, and was gone by the second morning. The Normandy was scheduled to leave, and Edie alerted him. Kolyat was ready, and met him at the port. He and Kolyat had time to become accustomed to living near to each other for the first time since Kolyat's youth. Although Thane had no true right to be, he was intensely proud of his son's respectful demeanor, internal strength, and acceptance of the bizarre requests of his father. They settled in the desert as an Ildrel and his son, true enough as that was. Thane grew aware that he was failing rapidly. He had had no time to take stock in his last days on the Normandy. Now he knew that his breath came harsher, the loss of the burning light of his siha, rather like the rough failure of adrenaline, sending his body and the lengths to which he could push himself down a jagged incline. His 7% loss of function over time had devolved into a 24% loss of capacity. The desert was bleak, stark, eerily beautiful, and a comfort to his lungs, to his heart, and to his son. It took weeks to determine where his siha was being held. It took months to infiltrate the facility, loop surveillance, discover patterns, bribe, and disable, and misdirect. It appeared 76% of his capacity was still sufficient. The hours of 1:45 a.m. to 4:15 a.m. were the most viable, and after meticulous planning, he was able to reach her by 2:07 a.m. in the 3rd month, 1st week, 5th day of her incarceration. She was not in a maximum security facility. She was under voluntary house arrest. Therefore, security was lacking in sophistication. This was not a prison, but it was a military building. A prison would not have been impossible either, but it would have involved more bribes. She was under surveillance, but that would be easily bypassed. He had recorded loops of her sleeping, and then that would be transitioned back to the live feed of her still there in the morning check-in. There would be no cause for alarm. She was not at risk for breaking out. She was here voluntarily. He understood. She was after her command, her identity, her legacy. As he entered, she was asleep, and he indulged in long minutes of watching her breath rise, her hair shift, the hood of her eyelids. He had been driven here. He had known she would not leave. He had known she would not want to risk him. He was aware this was obsession. His inability to accept reality as it stood. If anybody would understand that, it was her. He needed her, and it was that simple. He reached out a finger to smooth a lock of hair back behind her ear. Within 2.7 seconds, that finger was broken. She grabbed his hand, yanked him forward, and had the finger bent back to snapping in that time frame. He should have known better. He truly should. Within 5.4 seconds, she knew him. With her hand ready to slam into his throat, she faltered, her eyes wide and her mouth snarling. She took his breath. She had always taken his breath. He was speechless, the sharp pain in his hand still no match for the reality of seeing her, being in a room again that bore her scent, her eyes, the source of the only light he wanted. Her face flashed through surprise, shock, joy, and then settled on fury. She aimed for his face, but he was not there when her fist arrived. Further fury. Damn it, hold still. I am no longer under your command, Siha. I owe you no allegiance. She focused on recovering, and the betraying emotions faded from her face. Why are you here, Thane? I wished to see you. You wished... You're supposed to be spending time with Kolyat, quietly and tastefully, being angry at me. Kolyat is near. What I feel for you is not anger. Is he well? Are you well? Other than your finger? Kolyat is well. I am pleased to see you. Her head tilted and her brows drew together in distress. You are not well. I am not well. Anguish, helplessness, and pain crowded in on her face, and she dropped her face into her hands. You're an asshole, Krios. He smiled. He sat down next to her, took her hand in his uninjured one. She leaned on his shoulder, and he kissed her hair. Peace and the rightness of place at her side flooded him. This, more than anything, was what he sought. It was where he belonged, and that fulfilled, he was content. I know you wish for me to be safe, but you cannot provide that. I cannot give that to you either. Say what you'd say if you thought I'd listen. These walls waste your time and your life, Ruth. Time and life that could be spent together. Time and life that could be spent in true preparation for what is to come. We could leave now through these walls, unseen and unmarked. We could leave Earth and spend what time is left to us somewhere else, knowing otherwise you would be alone within these four walls. Wasted. War will return, and you will be needed, and wherever you are at that time, you will rise to leadership. Leaving here will not cost you any future victory. You would be a freed creature, no longer bound by your misguided will, as I am no longer bound. When the world tires of my presence, find Garrus and fight from Palaven. You will find the people who will fight with you. I will fail, and you will succeed, and your life would not be wasted within this voluntary box that your mind has constructed to hold you. It was cruel and true and would make no difference, but saying it was freedom. Saying it at her request was service of the same sort he had always provided. They both knew she could die in this room during a Reaper invasion. He had no hope attached to telling her these truths. But it would stand as a gesture that he was in this room with her, voluntarily. Having him do it and hearing him say it would not break her. She would know he believed in her, believed that she would end this, that whatever her path, that was certain. She shook her head against his shoulder, squeezed his hand. I tried to do something good, Thane. I tried to keep you out of danger. Why did you have to go and fuck that up? Perhaps being good does not suit you, Perhaps it does not suit me. You have made your choices, and I have made mine. You have to leave. I shall, and soon. There is little time. I can't go with you. He kissed her hair again. I know that, Sia. I wished to see you. I wished for you to be seen. She squeezed his hand. You can't come back. He smiled into her hair. That is beyond your control. You wish to keep me safe, and the only way you can prevent my return is to turn me in yourself. That would be counterproductive. Perhaps I should simply watch over you as you sleep? If you prefer to not know that I was here, I can arrange that. I'm usually good at threats. Are you, well? I am bored and angry. This is a nice change of pace. I'm sorry about your finger. I have missed you, Ruth. She moved suddenly, swarmed into his lap and wrapped her legs around him, kissing him. Her lips traveled over his jaw, his nose, his brows, his temples. She pressed his head back against the wall with the force of her kiss, and his hands found their home in her hair, unmindful of the pain in his finger. The invigoration of life in her presence affected him as much as Tyramit affected her. He was dressed as a maintenance crew worker. A generated face shield made him look familiar, human to others, and his voice could be altered to match the man he was impersonating. He was wearing a simple button-down blue shirt, and she began unbuttoning it, her fingers brushing over the dog tags that were on his chest. She pulled back, looked at the tags, looked at his face, and leaned in for a lancing, sweet kiss. She drew back, pulled a strand of hair from her head, tied it around the tags, binding them together. She tapped at them to keep them from rattling. They shouldn't give you away. His arms moved to fold around her, but she pushed his shoulders back against the wall. Hold the fuck still. You may owe me no allegiance, but that is a terrible impression of me. She shoved again. Shut up. Hold still. I swear I'll break another finger. As you wish. Sia. Definitely heard bitch that time. He held still and kept quiet under her teasing, revealing hands. She rolled her hips in brushing circles, exposing his skin and licking at him, kissing at him, biting at him, stroking her fingers over the lines of color that defined him. He was hard, straining, and fighting off the instinct to tear into her, restrain her, set the frenzy and need and drive that had brought him into this room loose on her body until she was screaming. He wanted to cover her mouth with his own so the screams would not be heard, but he would feel every one. She spoke between kissing him. There's nothing to do here, Thane. Absolutely nothing to do, and I spend my time thinking of you. Her hands moved fluidly, removing her shirt, but unwilling to move far to remove her pants or his, so she wriggled her way leg by leg from her loose shorts and freed his cock but left his pants otherwise on. She lifted her hips and leaned forward, guiding the tip of his cock to tease at her clit. She slid her body and arched her hips, pressing her hand to guide his cock along the crease of her body. But not inside. I should feel terrible about that. You're sick. Helpless, even. You're a dying man, Thane. And I want to use your body mercilessly. I want to exhaust you. I miss your mouth. I can't tell you how much. I miss your voice. I miss the way your cock would twitch against my ass when you were asleep, and how that led to not sleeping anymore. Hell, Thane, if you want to die, if you're going out of your way to do it, and you don't care, I volunteer to be the cause. That is perhaps not as much of a disincentive as you might hope. Oh, yeah, that's what I'm looking for. Say, disincentive again. The reckless joy her words and body brought him was amplified by her sliding her hips until he was inside her. She was panting, and she found his hands with her own, pressed his hands to the wall, bent elbowed over his head, both careless of the broken finger, the sharp squeeze of pain in against the relief, release, and torture of being with her, inside her, needed, clouding her thoughts as she clouded his. She leaned forward, put more of her weight on her hands, and pressed her breast to his mouth. He closed his eyes as the taste and scent of her sharpened, his tongue and teeth playing at her nipple as it hardened. She rode him slow, her head tipped forward to his, her hair curtained down his face, over her breast, caught in his mouth and on his tongue. Her body and mind, so familiar and sought after, brought him the fugue of recalling in short, bright bursts, other times, and other moments of touching her, talking to her, admiring her steel-lined thoughts that did not bend under his hands, only under her choosing to taste his skin. He no longer had concern for their spirits, whatever they were, either adamant and beyond his reach, or fully used up as fuel in their bright burn of living, gone by their deaths, not an ounce remaining or wasted. She would not live long, he would not live long, but while he was here, he would defy every willful demand she made to stay away. Here, in this unique, self-imposed prison, he met her without need to follow her orders, unless they aligned with his will. As always, sex and tyranny made her physically weaker and her thoughts softer. She came with harsh groans in his ear, and he refused to come at her command because he could, enjoying the squeeze and slide of her body, but staying hard for her until she was exhausted, sweat binding her hair to her face. He smiled against her breast when she came a second time, her muscles weakening and her will fading and drained, ravaged by her body's need to succumb to labor and reward. She looked at his frill. You are such an asshole. He removed his mouth from her breast and kissed her, then murmured, "Release my hands, Sia." She almost did immediately, reflexively, unaccustomed to following commands under Tiamat, because he had never given them. He had always used his body instead to direct her. He needed no such caution now. She was his, and she would serve his every whim and enjoy being senseless in his arms. She tried to resist, contrary as was her nature, and he enjoyed that, knowing her straining grip would give way to surrender. Why would I do that? But her hands were caressing in a slide away from his palms, across the nail marks she'd left. Because you miss my mouth, Ruth. He did not have much time remaining, but he lavished her with the caresses he'd spent months imagining, tracing the hollows and swells of her body with his hands and his mouth, creating new, treasured memory. He held her hand and gripped her hair and bent her throat back. He drove into her and felt her screams vibrate into his mouth. She was a different woman inside these walls, and he was a different man. They were better able to reach each other, to touch each other, to speak to each other of the currents rushing through their blood. She was not Shepard or Siha. She was his Ruth. My Ruth. My love. Words came easier here. Taken and given according to needs and hunger and love. When his time had passed, he reluctantly moved her body to exactly where she had been when he arrived. From there he could morph and map the footage, patterns he had watched, mesmerized, for hours. He kissed her temple and told her he must go. Don't come back. I don't need this, Thane. He smiled and stroked his fingers through her hair. Of course, Ruth. I understand. He returned to her, stole his hours. Not every day, but he did manage to match his required conditions of entry, approximately every 3 days. He spent a great deal of time with Kolyat, telling stories of the Normandy and their mission, asking about Kolyat's life, spending time as careful family. Kolyat had checked in on him on the evenings, and although he had not been alarmed, he had noted when Thane was gone. In answer to Kolyat's concern about Thane's missed rest, he tried a simple new tactic, telling the truth. He could lie and say he spent his time meditating in the desert, but instead he told his son, I visit Shepard in the evenings. Kolyat had possibly considered much worse, Thane realized. Perhaps his imagination had posited assassinations every 3 days. Kolyat said, Do you love her? Thane inclined his head. I do. I wish you all the blessings of the gods, Father. That is good. Does she love you? She does.